So the Trump administration is now taking on the Smithsonian, ordering a wide-ranging review of current and scheduled exhibitions at this iconic institution. They're taking a look at everything, it appears. The exhibits themselves, the text on museum walls, what appears on websites and on social media. It's the latest move by the White House to impose the president's view on American culture and try to purge and go along with his very public disdain of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And today, the president will be at the Kennedy Center, another institution that he took over, announcing this year's honorees. Joining us right now is CNN's Brian Stelter for more on this. And when you talk about the Smithsonian, I mean, it is the largest collection of museums in the world. There are 21 properties that make up the Smithsonian. This will have a very big impact. What are you hearing about or seeing about how they'll go about this review?
Yeah, there's an overarching question here for all the viewers watching at home. Do you want Trump White House political appointees, political aides, vetting the tone and the content and the framing of museum exhibits? You know, that is the question on the table here, because this White House letter yesterday from a trio of political appointees and aides says that they will undergo a content review and they will take a very close look at 8 of the museums to begin with. We can put on screen 8 of the 21 museums that will be examined first. These include the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and some of the other very big famous museums along the National Mall in Washington, D.C. These White House aides say they will be looking for content that they want it to be, they say, historically accurate, uplifting, and inclusive, portraying America's heritage. They say they're going to look for opportunities to make, quote, content corrections where necessary, replacing divisive or ideologically driven language with unifying and historically accurate language. Of course, who decides what's historically accurate? Historically, that would be researchers. That would be, you know, folks at the Smithsonian who have been doing this their entire lives. So whether you believe the White House should have this role or not, it's in the eye of the beholder. Some would look at this and say, yeah, what's the big deal? Others would say, this sounds like a Stalinist purge. It sounds like something out of history books about regimes trying to control information. And what we do know about the last 6 or 7 months is that Trump and his aides are trying to exert more control over information in all sorts of ways. But there is an important note here about the Smithsonian storyline. The Smithsonian is not a part of the executive branch. It is not an agency under Trump's direct thumbprint. Courts have held it's not an agency of the government because it was established by Congress, it's funded by Congress, and it has its own board. So what will the Smithsonian do in this case, Kate? Well, we know the Smithsonian says it's going to work constructively with the White House, but I'm very curious to see just how open and helpful the Smithsonian museums are when it comes to being involved in this content review.
Yeah, and really at the end of the day, what changes are made? We've seen some of the like the DOD, they've had to admit mistakes when they've been purging websites and saying they didn't intend to and have to reinstate things, but having to be called out and caught doing it first. We'll see what comes of this.
Joining us now, CNN political commentators Karen Finney and Shermichael Singleton to walk through some of this. Good morning to both of you. Shermichael, I want to start with you on this White House review of the Smithsonian museums and exhibits to, in their words, ensure alignments with President Trump's directive. They want to, again, in their words, celebrate American exceptionalism, remove divisive or partisan narratives, and restore confidence in our shared cultural institutions. Shermichael, American history is messy. I think on our best days, you hope we wake up and do it better the next day. But all of that is there for us to learn about. And if you start to mess with that, does it not start to feel a little like 1984?
Well, I mean, I wasn't born in 1984, so I don't know.
Well, George Orwell, yeah.
I just had to add a little humor, a little humor to this very serious conversation. Look, as you pointed out, history is rife with some abhorrent aspects of it, and then you have a lot of triumphs, right? And I think the question for the average person is, how much of both of those things do you consider in one's personal assessment about where we are today? Some individuals have long argued this isn't really a new thought process, that, well, we probably shouldn't focus so much on the abhorrent part, but focus more so on the innovations. And then there are others who would argue, well, you can't overlook or minimize the abhorrent aspects, because clearly you have to acknowledge them so that we don't repeat them. I think you're going to probably ultimately find some folks that are going to say, hey, we got to meet ourselves in the middle. We got to have some middle ground on this. And as Kate was just talking about in the previous segment with Brian Stelter, you have seen in the past couple of months where some officials have attempted to make changes to only come around and say, well, wait a minute here, maybe we went too far. This was a mistake. This was an error. We need to correct this. And I ultimately think you'll probably see some combination of that moving forward, if I'm going to be honest with you.
Karen, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm with you in the 1984 cultural reference, particularly given that this follows a pattern across what we're seeing Trump do. I mean, we know he's hostile to the ideas around diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I would argue represent the best of American values. The idea that, yes, history is messy, but we're constantly trying to get it right and do better. You know, one of the museums is the National Museum of the American Indian. I remember going last year to a screening of Killers of the Flower Moon, Leonardo DiCaprio, big film, important film about a period in our history that most of us never learned about, but is so vitally important to understanding what was happening with Native Americans at that part of time in our history. But look, this follows the pattern. You know, think about this. So we fire the person who gives us the data. He's firing the person he doesn't like. You don't like the jobs numbers? Fire the person. Get me the sycophant who's going to give me the numbers that I like. I don't like the way history's written. I don't like that exhibit that makes me look bad. We're going to change it. I mean, this is an authoritarian playbook where he's trying to not only control access to information, but the actual information itself. And we're seeing him do this across a number of sectors, not just the museums, not just the data that is so vital, as we were just talking about. So I think we've seen this before. We're going to see more of it. I think he's going to do like they've been doing, go into it with a hatchet, not a scalpel, and it's going to be detrimental to the story of this country. And, you know, the last thing I'll say is, it is also a sign of a weak man, a weak leader. Why are you afraid of the truth? You know, strong leaders take the truth, find the solutions, or figure out how do you deal with the truth. They don't just change it to suit their fancy.
Sure, Michael, Karen uses the word authoritarian, that he's going in, making this argument that he's just changing anything he doesn't want. There is the case that we really haven't seen, at least in recent memory, presidents going into museums and trying to change history. What do you say to that framing of it?
Yeah, sure. I think other presidents in the past, at least conservative presidents, have opted to focus on, again, some of the triumphs that we have seen in American history, whether that's on race or gender or even class for that matter. And I think that the president is attempting to do that, but perhaps not in the traditional way that other presidents in the past have. And so, again, I would agree with Karen that you certainly don't want to erase history. You can't erase it. The story is what the story is, the good, bad, and the ugly. But I would posit this position. How much of the past do we focus on, and how much of the triumphs and where we're headed do we focus on? I would argue it has to be a combination of the two. But again, there are some others who would say, well, sure, Michael, I get the past, but I think we got to move on if we're going to get better. And then again, I think there are others who would say, well, yeah, we should move on, but you have to learn from the things that we've gone through in order to move on. And so again, I see it as a mixed bag.
Karen, I'll give you the last word on
sure,
that.
Michael, it's a mixed bag, but the point is, in America, the whole idea of America is that it should all be out there, and each one of us can decide for ourselves what's the part we're going to focus on. The point is, the information should be available. We shouldn't be afraid of things that might be painful. That was why we literally were founded as we were trying to escape a mad king.
All right, Karen Finney.